Gather round, Kidmin leaders, and be encouraged and equipped as you build the kingdom. Now here's your host, Amber Pike.
Welcome back to the Kidmin Huddle. Today we are talking about a super important topic, and I have a super awesome guest, Angela Lewton from KidCheck. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I always love doing podcasts with you. It's so much fun.
I don't even know how many we've done, but we've done several. And each one is important, and everybody needs to listen to them because KidCheck is all about safety for kids. And in children's ministry, we want to disciple them, teach them about Jesus, but in order for us to do this, we have to make sure that they are safe. Mamas and dads are not going to leave us their kids unless we know they know that they are safe and protected and harm is not coming. And there's so many things that are avoidable, things we should be watching for. And I'm so excited about today's topic, red flags in children's ministry. But Angela, why is this important? Why do we need to be aware and paying attention to child safety?
Child safety is one of those topics that has so many dimensions to it, but it's so important, like you said. And, families are becoming far more educated than they used to be. So they're very in tune with who's not following through on protective measures, who is actually not carrying a child protection policy. They know about all these things. So child safety, obviously, it protects and safeguards children. And that's one of the main reasons why it should be focused on. But also, it ensures an optimal learning environment for these kids to be able to open their minds and learn because they feel safe. Also, it has been proven most recently that by focusing on child safety and creating an environment where a kid or a child feels like they can be themselves and learn, it also helps prevent the effects of abuse and trauma that some may experience. And then for the child's ministry director, it helps to eliminate potential allegations. And so that's also a very big piece. But I think what's most important, what I've seen recently, is that it allows for cross-generational connections that are safe, which are so important in ministry. So those are a few of the reasons why we focus on child safety. But in other words, it's just a key topic. But the red flags, how they play into that is oftentimes when there's an incident, when we ask questions or we're trying to get more information, we always hear, oh, there were no red flags. Oh, there was no reason, I didn't see any reason to suspect anything from this person, which sometimes may be true. But other times, if you go a little bit deeper, you start to see the emergence of these red flags. And I think it's important that we clarify that these red flags aren't necessarily proof of harmful intentions, but they are an intuitive marker that helps people to understand that something is off and that you need to gain more information.
And you should always trust that gut because the alternative is if you don't and you're just like, well, I'm overthinking, I'm overreacting. Then when something happens, that can't be undone. So trust your gut.
And I always tell people, if you have a calling to work with children or youth, you are given a healthy skepticism. I feel like for those, and there's been a lot of men and women I've met over the years who work with children and youth, and they seem to have a stronger intuition than those who don't work with kids on a daily basis. And so I often encourage people really learn how to listen to that intuition, learn how that healthy skepticism can help prevent incidents. And oftentimes you can't really put your finger on it, but you just know something's not quite right. And really where it kicks in is when people start to really listen to that, inner voice. Some people call it the Holy Spirit, others call it, intuition.
Mama bear syndrome.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And so it's getting people to act on that. Because oftentimes, we can present the most compelling research and information and data, but getting people to really act when they feel something is off is really the most important step, because that action, oftentimes, if nothing comes of it, great, nothing came of it. But if some prevention was put in place, or, a child maybe was helped, that's really what we're looking for. That's the key, is to prevent abuse and to protect children.
Even if it's just
So
monitoring, like these, if you're watching for these red flags, obviously you don't want to accuse someone without that proof, but it's the, things just don't seem right. So I'm going to put XYZ in place to protect. I'll give you just a quick real life example, but not with an adult, with an older child. When I was a young teen, my mom, she's full on mama bear, and she did not have a good feeling about this one teen that would come to our church. And she told me, she's like, Amber, never be alone with him. I don't have a good feeling. And he ended up exposing himself to the pastor's daughter. So my mom was, she had that feeling. She saw flags that didn't seem okay, and she was protecting her daughter, and she was right. So monitor, put the things in place. You don't have to confront and be like, well, you're a child predator. I just know it. But pay attention to the signs and protect those babies. Yes.
it's true. And, one of the things we always like to mention, highlight about predators is there's really no profile. I mean, their friends, family, acquaintances, community leaders, business owners, volunteers, teachers. There's just no stereotype. And so that's also why it's key to listen to that intuition. We see the stats, 80 to 90% male, 10 to 20% female, but a lot of times they present as religious or highly religious. They attend church 2 to 4 times a month. They actively seek leadership roles sometimes. I mean, there's all these different points of character that always need to be taken into consideration. But sometimes you just may not know. It just may be that feeling. And that is really what you want to act on. And so red flags are a way, like we mentioned, they're just a marker. They tell you, I need, something's off, like just exactly what your mom did. I need to find out more, or I need to offer a warning. And I think that's great. And yeah, I mean, that mama bear syndrome,
Yeah.
that
It's
really
and I've done that with my own kid. There have been people I've told him to avoid. I've had extra teens watching my son in situations. I have removed my child from places where I did not feel it was safe for him. Um, trust the signs. But okay, so we kind of established the why. Let's jump into, by the way, I'm going to link in this. There's a great blog at KidCheck with this. There are so many great blogs, but especially this one, because we're probably not going to get to cover all of them. So it will be in the show notes. But Angela, what are some of these red flags that we need to start watching for?
perfect. So let's go ahead and just kind of highlight a few. One of the big ones is a person who continually tries to access children, even if they don't have any ties to a program. They always want to be in there. That is a key red flag. Anyone who has excessive interest in a child or group of children, asks to be alone. We talk a lot about in the flags, you know, isolation is a key part of how predators offend. So being able to reduce isolation and increase accountability as you look at your policies or as you design your guidelines, that's really, really important, because that's a key way that someone can get access or to a child is, just by mingling in, fitting in, figuring out, and they look for environments where safety breakdowns are apparent to them, but may not be apparent to others. So it's really important.
I'm going to
Often,
pause and ask a question on that.
sure, yeah.
Um, so what would the difference be between interest in a specific child or group of children versus that's your favorite kid? I know we're not supposed to have favorites in ministry, but we all do. So maybe for someone who's figuring out how to identify these red flags, what would be the difference between a potential red flag in isolating, focusing in on a child versus that's my favorite kid in ministry?
So you're right. We're not supposed to have favorites.
But we do.
And what most do. But one of the things I think is the key differentiator is exactly what you just mentioned, is the isolation piece. You can have a favorite child and pay attention to them in a group setting, things like that. But really where the differentiation is when someone tries to remove that child or isolate them away from the group or other teachers. Oftentimes we see when the grooming process begins, the behaviors become more riskier because isolation is apparent. So if you see someone that is removing a child from the normal activities, that is the difference. It's okay to have favorites, but your favoritism should be amongst everyone, not somewhere off by yourself with a child.
So
And so,
always wanting, Bobby in your small group is different than, hey, let's go talk over here in this closed classroom about your day. Good.
and it's just, if you start to see someone who is, bringing material and showing a child material that he's not showing the other, or he or she is not showing the other children, that's also an indication. And that's why you always want two sets of fully screened adult eyes on the children. I mean, we talk about the rule of twos, we talk about, different bathroom policies and things like that. And that's why those are in place, is so that you don't have anyone who's able to, remove that child from regular activities. But that would be the key differentiator between having a favorite and isolating a children for, nefarious reasons.
That's good. That's good. All right. What other red flags are we watching for?
So, one thing is frequently offers favors to help you out with the children, but isn't screened or an approved volunteer. I think, screening is a very, very important thing. At KidCheck, we talk about the 7 steps of comprehensive screening. And that's really a key, because you can know people, but to really know about people and to know someone, you do need to gather information. And that should be done, especially if someone's going to gain direct access to children. That gathering of information under the system of screening really needs to be accomplished, because screening offers so many benefits. One, it gives you a multi-dimensional view of a candidate. It allows you to look at their history working with kids and youth. It helps you to understand their character and their commitment to your program. And so screening is a big key in this whole thing, and allowing someone who doesn't want to go through the screening process or hasn't been through it to have access to kids, you really, that is a red flag. When someone's like, oh, I'm good, but I want to help you out. It's like, well, to get access to children, these are the steps that you have to take.
And screening
So,
is more than just a background check, because that only notifies the people who have been caught, who are probably not going through your approval process.
and
That's like a
yeah,
whole nother podcast. Blog post, KidCheck is so many resources on what screening should be, but just want to drop that in there. It's more than a background check.
we've learned a few things over the years, and that is number one thing, is that background checks aren't silver bullets. That's one piece of the overall screening process, but it certainly isn't the most important. And but it does need to be done. I mean, if you're usually we recommend that you rescreen and screen people every 12 to 18 months, depending on their role and responsibility with children. And it is a very good indicator. But there are also other things, references, face-to-face interviews, being done by a group from the organization. Those are all very, very important. Application. You would be so shocked, Amber, at how often children's ministry volunteers don't complete their applications to 100%. And I get it. Everybody's strapped for time. We're all trying to do more with less. But that application is really the foundational piece of how you're going to gather all of the information. And so if there is a hesitancy to complete the application, either it's written or digital, that's also a red flag. I don't know if I have it listed, but it's also a red flag, because that application is really, your way of finding out more information. And so it's just very important.
And if they don't want to
But
do it, they're likely hiding something.
it's true. It's true. It's also like the social media release. I mean, I was presenting one time and a woman asked the question. She said, I see that you are an advocate for social media release, as, that comes with the background check release as well. And she said, what if we have people that won't sign that social media release form? And I said, that's a key indicator that
Now, with that, a social media release, meaning that the church is allowed to view your social media and okay, just making sure that
Yeah.
I'm thinking the same.
Yeah. So what that means is that when somebody applies either for a staff position or a volunteer role where they're interacting directly with kids, the organizations that they're working with has the right to go and review their social media. And it's always nice and appreciated to ask for consent for that. I mean, obviously you can
I'm
go
going to do
out.
it whether you tell me I can or not.
Exactly. I mean, but it's always nice to say,
Yes.
hey, I see you have your social media handles listed here. Do you have any additional ones that aren't tied to your name or are different or for another organization? I mean, it's just kind of good to
Trying to
see
be
how the
transparent. Yeah. And hey, here's what we're doing.
I mean, and oftentimes there are organizations who will do specific, in addition to background checks, they'll also do social media checks. And there are quite a few times when you'll find things attached to a person that they either reposted or commented on that could be questionable.
Yeah.
So,
I think
that's
with your
all.
teens, this is important too, because your skimpy bikini pictures
Mm.
or you doing, smoking or drinking when you were underage because they're posting it. That's a no from me. That's a you were removed. And we had actually a candidate for a ministry position. And I went through his social because I'm gonna check you on social media for sure. And I scrolled back years worth of stuff reading posts, and this person had a clear problem with the church and just some unresolved issues that he needed to get addressed. And I'm like, no, this is a hard no. This will cause problems. Just the way that he talked about the church. Absolutely. Check the social media.
So, yeah, checking social media is definitely a given. Also, on the other hand, though, sometimes by looking at social media, you can also find, skills and talents that maybe they didn't even mention. Sometimes you'll find musical talents, you'll find artistic talents,
Photography. Yeah.
yeah, I
Even
mean,
being good at social media, which could take something off
exactly.
your plate.
Video editing, podcast editing. I mean, all these types of things you can find through sort of a social media review. And so I always encourage people, I mean, don't go in looking for the bad, but be open to the fact that you may learn something about this that may bring something to your ministry that's just, incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
So social media can be used twice, but going back, if they're not willing to allow you access or don't want you sort of, mixing around in it can be a red flag. So it's important to pay attention. But yes, that approval and screening and all those things are very, very much helpful. We already talked about isolation, but another key red flag is when someone intentionally isolates or separates a child from friends, family, teachers, other students or peers, things like that. That's a huge red flag. And by decreasing those opportunities for isolation, whether you are, and this can go several ways. It can be done in your onboarding. It can be done in training. I mean, what we really encourage is much like your huddle. We encourage a weekly huddle, a quick 5 to 10 minute huddle where you're reviewing policies, guidelines, things that matter to safety. And it's not a big training once a year where people have to spend hours. It's continually updating them, making sure that if there's any questions, you answer them. But that reducing isolation piece is really key. It's just very important, and people can learn about that because sometimes people don't understand what that means, but they need to know before they start taking on their role actively.
And by using that huddle and reinforcing, your eyes can't be everywhere at all times. So if your team is constantly being made aware of this and they begin to see, hey, so and so keeps isolating so and so. Maybe I need to take this to the leader. So, love that. Wonderful. Just those quick safety tips. Keep them fresh in front of your people frequently.
And I just think it helps people to actually, what you want. Like, obviously, child protection policy is a whole nother training workshop conversation. But within your child protection policy, you really want to minimize the gray area in working with children. I mean, that's the whole point of it, is that everybody's on the same page and that there's no subjective interpretation of what your guidelines mean, because that's really also where you can run into, having an incident, is when somebody says, well, wait a second, I thought that meant this. And it's like, no, those huddles, those quick 5 to 10 minute huddles a week can really illuminate and confirm for people what is the appropriate behavior in these situations, which you want everybody on the same page.
That's good.
So the next one I need to mention, because we were talking about social media, but if somebody uses a digital platform to make contact without parental permission, excessive texting, emailing, things like that, just engaging children through gaming without parental consent is also a very big red flag and common in this day and age. I was on a workshop a few weeks ago, and the woman asked, she said, I'm wondering, is it appropriate for a youth leader to contact my child through texting and through, I can't remember if it was gaming or platform or something. And I was like, if you haven't given consent for a ministry leader to reach out and communicate with your child, it's a hard no. Anyone under 18, there should be consent there from a parent. And these digital platforms are being used more and more by predators, and also just because it removes, it's just a different form of physical isolation. And you just really want to eliminate that. So that one I always like to mention, because digital platforms are being used at younger and younger ages. And so it's just really important that as a ministry leader, you pay attention to those things. And sometimes it's what children don't say that you want to pay attention to. If you're hearing that, there's a ministry leader reaching out behind the scenes and kids are, they don't really say much about it, it's worth going in and asking some really direct questions like, did have your parents given you permission to do this? What, can you tell me a little bit more? It's good to pay attention to those digital platform and that
And
access.
to protect you as the leader, especially with preteens of the opposite gender. If you are a younger ministry leader, those crushes are legit. And you want to be able to protect you and your team as well. So, yes.
And you never want to look like
Yes.
you are carrying out an inappropriate behavior. And that does happen quite often. A teen ministry person may not know, oh my gosh, this isn't it. I didn't know this was in the guidelines that I couldn't, text offline with, and so it's important that you share those details with people constantly to make sure that they stick. The next one is pushes the limits of established policy. And this one is interesting because it's always done to see how far they can go. How far can they push those limits before somebody reacts or questions them? And that's all part of continuing to introduce riskier and riskier behaviors, which always lead to some sort of an incident. And so pushing the limits of those established policies is really, it's important to take note of. When somebody just doesn't want to adhere to your policies, that's a very big red flag. But we need to make sure that they understand those policies and choose not to follow them. That's also another key point of it, because sometimes they don't understand what the policy means. So training, onboarding, continuing to share those is really important. But just that pushing back on those boundaries, or continuing to commit infractions like with a bathroom policy or, communication or things like that, after they've been spoken to, given a warning, things like that. So it's really important to pay attention. The other part of that, though, is the red flag when someone overrides authority. So there's a difference between pushing the boundaries and then someone who overrides that authority. And, we really see that with a lot of guidelines in the child protection policy. We see that with the 2-adult rule or, bathroom procedures. Once again, if they are actually overriding that and doing something different, huge red flag. You want to make sure that you address that immediately. And so that's also a key thing.
That would kind of be that like mentality of, no, I know what this kid needs. That's
Yep.
probably in an isolation situation.
It's all tied together. And so, but those behaviors, one thing that we have talked about over the years with predators that's interesting is that behaviors are highly repetitive. Very often, someone who intends to do harm, if they find a process that works, they don't deviate from it. So the key in training people is to identify these red flags. And someone who's pushing those boundaries, who is like, don't put your rules on me, I know what's best, things like that. Those are key things that you want to look out for, because those behaviors are probably repetitive. It's probably worked before, and they try to use that same sort of approach again and again.
Which could possibly have been prevented with a good screening process, because if they tried this at another church, the leader might have seen those things. So see, people, it all works together.
Yeah, and just that paying attention. I mean, it does. It's all working together, and it's just important. And it's so funny because oftentimes something will catch. Like I've often heard someone say, I remember that conversation now where they thought this policy was antiquated or outdated for the current ministry or things like that. And so that's just really a key thing, that if you can pick that up in the beginning, it's just good to sort of follow that. I need more information. I need to understand where this person's coming from. Good. So the other thing is that I will mention is topics that are not age appropriate. Oftentimes with social media and so many, information sources on the internet, that's really something key that you want to pay attention to. When somebody is bringing up topics that just don't fit with the age group, that can be something like sexual jokes, inappropriate comments, innuendos that are all done in front of children. That's also another key red flag that you really want to pay attention to. And so, just these overt behaviors, and I get it. Oftentimes, whether you have 10 volunteers or you have 50 to 75 volunteers, you can't be everywhere at once. You can't hear all these conversations. And that's why it's really important to train people. And what I mention is having what we call a speak up culture, where it's kind of an open door policy times 100, where people aren't fearful of retribution if they bring something to you as a leader. They know that not only is the door open, but that their feedback will be taken seriously, and that there will be no retribution for mentioning, hey, you know what, I heard this person make this comment in a group of 5th graders, and I just want to confirm this is not appropriate, or these questions. That speak up culture is really what you need if you can't be everywhere at once, if your eyes and ears can't be picking up everything. You want to make sure that you really push that culture, because 1, it increases safety, and 2, you get to understand things about people a little bit better than if you're not able to work directly with them. So that speak up culture is also another podcast, but it's really important. And the key piece with that is that there is no retribution for anybody who brings something to you that is a policy violation or a safety concern or something along those lines. And you'd be surprised what people share when they're not fearful of getting in trouble or being ostracized or questioned or things like that. It's really helpful, and it's definitely worth investing in creating that type of open culture, because like you said, you need to know these things, and you can't be everywhere.
I think with
So,
that, transparency is really good too. So, kind of on the flip side of that argument, sometimes kids are going to bring up something
yeah,
that is maybe not shouldn't be addressed in the group, but once the kid says it, it's out. So my policy is if we have one of those conversations, moms and dads know. So, hey, this was brought up in class today, because sometimes kids get the information wrong and then they go back and if they're like, well, Miss Amber was talking about this today. No, no,
yeah.
no, 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 no. So speak up culture, transparency when incidents happen with other children, with leaders. Let it be known to protect all interests, everybody involved.
Prioritizing that communication is really important. Also because people communicate differently. And so how you may have volunteers that are more introverted, you may have volunteers that are more extroverted, but by prioritizing that transparency and communication, it's just really helpful for making sure that you're keeping kids safe. So the other thing that, I probably won't go into any more of these red flags, but I do want to talk about some prevention tips
Yeah.
in terms of how you prevent things from happening. I mean, we've already talked about, the speak up culture, but just sharing your commitment to safety is very important, whether it's to new families, whether it's to new volunteers, existing staff. By always talking about that commitment to safety, it's really helpful, and it gives parents peace of mind to know that that is on your mind. The other thing we mentioned is training and education, prioritizing training and education. And the key there is how it's delivered. Oftentimes people can't schedule in 2 to 3 hour blocks once or twice a year, but they can listen to a 5 to 10 minute huddle a week. And so just really making sure that you're always thinking about, what do I need to share? What are the skills that need to be, developed here? And just things like just prioritizing that training and education. Screening process, child protection policy, even if you have to update one that's older, it's really important, because a child protection policy isn't meant to be stuck somewhere in a file cabinet. It should be a living, breathing document that you base your communication, your training, your awareness, all these things on. And so I always encourage people, look at your child protection policy, make sure that it fits in this modern sort of world, and make sure that it can be used. And the key thing with the child protection policy is finding that balance where you're not getting overly detailed, where people's eyes like roll back in the back of their head, and too broad where they're applying subjective interpretation. You want to find that middle ground and actually write some of these policies that are very easy to understand. Almost, I would say, in fifth grade language, but just super easy to understand. That way there's clarity and no confusion. The other thing I would say in terms of a prevention tip is learning to say no. This is very hard for people, mainly because, a lot of times the profile of those who work with kids, non-confrontational, people pleasing, you find these things always servants' heart, but learning to say no is very difficult. But if that intuition tells you that, let's say you've gone through the screening process, you've done the background check, you've followed up with the references, you've had the face-to-face interviews, but you're still, something just isn't right. You're just not 100% sure. Learning to say no, or maybe replacing somebody somewhere that's not directly with kids for a time so that you can observe and sort of gather more information, is really key. It's key to preventing an incident. It's also key to increasing safety. But that learning to say no is a very, very important piece of the overall safety puzzle because it's hard for people.
Yeah.
And especially if you have somebody that just is new to your church and they've been there less than a month, maybe a few weeks, and they're so gung-ho and they really want to volunteer. And that's also where the waiting period comes in, which I
And
know
if you
is
have a policy, you have a policy in place that says, I'm sorry, this is our policy. You cannot serve. You're protecting yourself while protecting the kids. And yes, yes, yes.
and just redirecting them to somewhere that may be a better fit. And it allows you, waiting periods differ between organizations. Some people have, 2 weeks, some people are 30 days, some people are, 90 days, 6 months, whatever it is, whatever your policy states about the waiting period, that's a really good opportunity to leverage learning to say no. Here's our policy. You're brand new to our ministry. Let's direct you somewhere else for a while and let you get to know the church and the organization and me and these kids a little bit better. And then, we'll revisit they bringing you in and giving you direct access. But that learning to say no it's really hard. I mean, nobody likes to say, no, whether it's no to a new volunteer or no, I'm not going to deviate from these established guidelines or policies, anything, but that learning to say no is really a key prevention tip.
And something that your senior leadership needs to be involved in, especially if you have trouble saying no. If you did say no or if you have trouble, get your senior leadership on board. They need to know why, and to be a backup for you.
Absolutely. And, it's that tip of the spear mentality where those who are, setting precedent at the top, it really does sort of move down through the organization. And then, your children's ministry leaders, your youth leaders, they understand that it's okay. It's okay to do this because I see senior leadership modeling this. And it's okay to say no. And it's okay to say, I'm not sure why I'm saying no if it's outside our guideline or policy, but I just need more information. And we're going to redirect them over here and settle them in a little bit better. So those are the prevention tips I would say that I would share in addition to these red flags. They're key, they're easy. They don't require too much effort, but they're just good to remember in these times.
So it might feel like this is a lot, but it is crucial. We cannot disciple boys and girls if they are not in a safe environment. Parents aren't bringing them if they are not safe. And we, as ministry leaders who love these children of God, we don't want anything to happen to them. So we have to do our due diligence. We have to put screenings in place, policies in place. We need to be paying attention, training our leaders on what to look for and what to watch for. We don't want to think it will happen in our church. But I unfortunately hate to tell you, it's very likely. We had a situation at a previous church, thank goodness, because we had not necessarily a written policy, because I did not inherit one when I came to that church, but a ministry leader from our church was arrested with an FBI sting for purchasing a 10-year-old online.
Oh my gosh.
Now, our church had safe practices in place. Adults were never isolated with children. Now, every one of us mamas at church, we were grilling our kids like, did this ever happen to you? But there were policies in place, safe practices to protect children.
Yeah.
There are, I'm sure Angela probably has, unfortunately, dozens upon dozens upon dozens of stories that are not the same with a different outcome. You don't want that to be your church. You don't want that to be your kids. So, as equally as important as it is to stand on the authority of the word when you are teaching and leading in ministry, it is just as important to make sure that these kids are safe. I cannot encourage you guys enough. Please go check out KidCheck. They, one, have a check-in system to help you keep it, it's good to know who's there and who has what allergies and if there are custody issues, because sometimes those red flags might not be from volunteers. They could be from unauthorized family members who are trying to get access to kids that shouldn't be. There's so many things we could look at. So KidCheck has that, but their heart, and which is why I love them so much, is they want to keep kids safe. So they have a blog full of stuff, and it is not a blog in which is always go buy our stuff. That is not the purpose of their blog. They want to educate you, they want to equip you, give you ideas, help you, things like this. It's a list of 20 red flags that you should be looking out for. I think we maybe covered 6 or 7. There's a lot that we should look for. They have blog after blog. Go spend some time there. You can get a demo if you're looking for a check-in system. So many things. Angela, anything I really missed, big picture about KidCheck other than your all's awesomeness?
So, well, thank you. We appreciate all those kind words. We really do. It really is our heart to help organizations protect kids. And, but we also believe that check-in is a very big part of the overall safety puzzle. And not just check-in for kids, now we offer youth check-in, which is similar, but very different, more age appropriate, and specifically designed for youth. And so it rolls across both age groups, but it is a very important piece. And in this day and age, you covered it. I mean, there's health and wellness information that needs to be shared. There's no contact orders that need to be addressed. There's lots of information that leaders need in order to be able to lead their organizations and be informed. And so we're really, whether you use a pen and paper or you choose a digital or electronic system like KidCheck, it's just important that you have that, because it really is the front door to your organization. And people do make, first impressions are really hard to change, and people want to see that safety is first and foremost. And so, there's a lot that comes with our check-in systems, whether it's attendance tracking or access to data or, just all those types of things. But just use something so that you know that you're not releasing kids to people who shouldn't be retrieving them. I mean, that's really the key thing. And it's just a big part of your overall safety plan. But also on our website, we have ebooks, we have videos, we have lots of different safety content that is available to you, whether you are a customer of KidCheck or not. And we always encourage people, use these safety resources. They're free to you. You've got access. I mean, we have everything from, I think we've got a downloadable emergency instructions flipbook. That's fantastic to put in classrooms or hallways. We've got, ebooks optimizing child safety. We also have an ebook coming out pretty soon about predator proofing your organization. And it takes all that we have talked about today and goes into much greater detail, just so that you can be more informed about how to do that. We've also got downloadable, applications and just lots of different assets for you to get access to. And so we want you to have that regardless of if you work with us or not. But keep us in mind, keep us in mind if you do want to transition from pen and paper to children's check-in, or if you have a youth situation where you just want to increase communication with that youth, build community, give them the opportunity to, manage their own accounts and check-in and things like that. Like I said, it's definitely more age appropriate. But all those resources are out there and they are available on the KidCheck blog. And hopefully
KidCheck.com. I'm
yeah.
going to link this blog post. There's 20 red flags, but so many things at KidCheck, blog, ebook. You can get a demo and see how the check-in works. But whether you want that or not, please, please, please go check out some of these safety and security resources. It is crucial to you having a safe and successful ministry. Go check it out and then start thinking. You might have been like me. I, during different ones of these red flags, was thinking about different people who were red flags in ministries that I've served. And remember, I'm small church. So if I in small church had multiple people that, and they were then, don't hear me wrong, I paid attention to red flags. If I in a small church there's probably some red flags you need to be keeping an eye on in whatever size, shape, place your church is. So go forth, check out the blog, go visit kidcheck.com. Angela, thank you so much for hanging out, for imparting some wisdom with us, and thank you for just the heart behind KidCheck. I love you guys and your hearts to keep kids safe.
Thank you. We appreciate you, Amber, and we're always so glad to be here and participate in these types of things. So thank you for having us.
Absolutely. And remember, ministry leaders, what you do matters.